The 2026 Toyota Thunderbone looks like it just rolled out of a tactical vehicle yard, but it's carrying a boutique hotel on its back. We're going to tour the wheels, the underbody, the winch, the lighting, then step into the living space, the cockpit, and the whole power story. This is the weird part, because the more axles and wheels you add, the more things can fail, and every recovery gets expensive fast. Before we go deeper, one thing has to be clear. Thunderbone usually shows up as a concept and in rendered imagery, so any specs should be treated as estimates, especially the 12-wheel, 6-axle layout and the claimed 800 to 1,200 pound-feet of torque. The goal of this video isn't to sell a dream. It's to separate what looks amazing on screen from what actually makes engineering sense. And the more wheels you see, the more you have to scrutinize the trade-offs, from maintenance to real-world roadside recovery. Thunderbone is imagined as a tactical-style motorhome for people who want to go far, but still live like they're at home. It's aimed at long-haul routes across deserts, snowy mountains, and deep forests, the kind of places where most RVs end up turning around. The mission here isn't a one-night camp. It's building a base camp for days, with cooking, clean water, and a proper shower. Looks great, but not so fast. On paper, the 12x12 concept promises better traction, more even weight distribution, and the ability to haul a massive cabin. But here's the strange truth. The real mission is decided by the chassis and drivetrain, because the more axles you add, the harder it gets to steer, control, and maintain. Next, we're going to break down what kind of platform could realistically carry 12 wheels and that kind of torque. A true 12x12 can't just be a truck with 2 extra rear axles bolted on. It needs a heavy-duty truck chassis, typically a thick ladder frame that resists twisting, and enough axle capacity to be legal and safe. In a concept context, the most believable approach is a 6-axle platform, 3 axles per side, where at least the 2 rear axles are driven, and the front axle also receives power to match the 12x12 claim. The problem is, the more axles you add, the more complex the drivetrain becomes. You need a transfer case, long driveshaft runs, a differential for every axle, and multiple stages of diff locks so torque doesn't bleed away to the wheel that's slipping. The trade-off is weight, rapidly increasing heat and friction, and maintenance weak points concentrated in joints, seals, and bearings across every axle. And there's an even bigger headache, turning. If only the front axle steers, the body swings like a ship, and tight forest roads become a nightmare. That's why a practical design usually needs a rear steer axle, or at least a mid-axle assist, even if it's limited angle steering to cut the turning radius. But before we decide whether it's practical or just gorgeous render work, we have to look at the exterior, because the outside tells you exactly what this machine is trying to be. From a distance, Thunderbone looks like a rolling steel block, tall, squared-off shoulders, and proportions straight out of a tactical rig. The 12-wheel setup with aggressive off-road tires is the biggest attention grabber because it instantly signals traction and terrain capability. But the more tires you have, the more rolling resistance you create, and the more pulling power you burn just to keep moving. Up front, the reinforced steel bumper, the winch, and the recovery hooks look like they were built for self-extraction when things go wrong. Stand next to that winch and you can tell it's not small. Look closely right here. The lighting is pushed to the extreme too. Roof lights, bumper lights, side lights, like it wants to turn the wilderness into daylight. The issue is electrical load, heat, and glare, because you can't run everything everywhere. Details like the steps, wide fender flares, and thick bodywork feel rugged, but they also reveal a simple truth. This is a lot of mass. In a concept build, the tougher it looks, the more the wind and stability problem matters at speed. And what really decides where it can go is underneath. Skid protection, approach and departure angles, and where the fuel tanks sit. If the belly is low or the rear overhang is long, one bad mound of dirt can stop you cold. Next, we step inside to see whether the luxury is actually usable or just perfect for a render. Step inside and Thunderbone changes its voice completely. Outside, it's a fortress. Inside, it's aiming for a high-end mobile apartment. In the main living zone, the headline feature is the L-shaped leather sectional wrapping the corner, making it feel spacious and truly lounge-ready for a group. But the bigger that couch gets, the more payload and floor space it eats. And the real question is whether the layout still stays livable when the vehicle is bouncing and flexing. There are family-style bunk beds, which fits the long trip mission. If this is a concept, the real thing to scrutinize is how the beds are braced, how cabinets latch, and whether table edges and fixtures are designed not to launch when you hit potholes. A lot of luxury RVs fail right there. Look closely right here. The skylight and panoramic windows make the cabin bright and open, perfect for mountains and forests. But the trade-off is insulation and water sealing. One heavy storm or a freezing night will expose the quality of the seals, insulation layers, and heating system. Ambient LED lighting and dark wood-tone floors look premium, but off-road interiors can't just be pretty. They have to survive vibration, dust, and moisture. If the materials aren't right, a few trips can bring squeaks, cracked seams, and swollen edges. And with a 12 by 12 motorhome, the center of gravity is usually high. The more wood, glass, and heavy appliances you pack inside, the higher that center of gravity climbs, and the more the vehicle will sway when you steer. That's a real trade-off you can't dodge. And there's more. True off-grid living isn't about the couch or the lights. It's about the kitchen, fresh water, waste tanks, and the bathroom. If those systems aren't sized correctly, you'll be heading back to town sooner than you think. Next, we move into the kitchen and bathroom systems to see whether that 5-star promise can actually hold up. Now we're at the cockpit, where luxury has to step aside for control and safety. The Thunderbone concept describes a modern command center cockpit. Digital gauges, a tall vertical screen, multi-angle cameras, and terrain mode buttons. Sounds great, but with a long and heavy vehicle, what matters most is visibility, braking confidence, and how it feels when you're descending a steep grade. The problem is this. If this is built on a heavy-duty truck platform, a realistic cockpit should show the kinds of readouts SUVs rarely talk about, like transmission temperature, differential temperature, brake air pressure if it's running air brakes, and axle-by-axle overload warnings. A 360-degree camera and side cameras are mandatory because you can't reliably judge the rear overhang and the fender edges on tight forest trails or when backing into a campsite. One small scrape in a remote place can turn into an entire day of repairs. And those diff lock buttons in sand, mud, snow mode sound simple, but real operation requires knowing the correct lock sequence, using low range properly, and respecting speed limits. Abuse it, and the drivetrain heats up and wears out fast. Next, we'll talk about the thing that creates everything: pulling force, torque, and the drivetrain that makes all 12 wheels actually turn together. Now let's talk power, because a 12 by 12 motorhome only looks good if it can pull its own weight. The concept usually pairs Thunderbone with a heavy-duty diesel, because torque is what moves big loads at low RPM. The number you often hear is roughly 800 to over 1,200 pounds-feet, but what matters is the transmission and the gearing that comes with it. This is the expensive part. To make 12 wheels turn, you need a transfer case to split power, then multiple long drive shafts and a differential for each axle. The more axles you have, the more hotspots you create. The issue is heat and durability. When you're crawling uphill in mud, the transmission, differentials, and brakes all build heat quickly if cooling isn't sufficient. Diff locks help you escape wheel slip, but using them in the wrong order can bind the drivetrain and accelerate wear, especially when different wheels have different levels of grip. With an RV-style cabin, the off-grid electrical system has to be recalculated too. A generator, batteries, an inverter, and air conditioning can pull continuous loads when you're parked deep in the wilderness. The trade-off is fuel consumption and range. A vehicle this heavy may need a very large fuel tank to travel far. And at this point, every number should still be treated as a concept-based estimate. Next, we put it into a reality check. How far it can actually go, and where it gets stuck when the road is narrow, the bridge is weak, and the sand is soft. On paper, a 12 by 12 sounds almost terrain-proof because 12 tires spread the load and add traction. But in the real world, the first thing you run into is size. Tight forest roads, sharp bends, and trees right on the edge make it easy to get trapped. The problem is this: a long, heavy body is hard to turn around. If only the front axle steers, the turning radius can be so large you're forced to reverse in tiny steps. Then there's ground capacity. Small bridges, weak dirt roads, and soft sand can stop you not because you lack power, but because you're simply too heavy. But here's the strange part. More tires can help traction, but they also increase rolling resistance. In deep sand, the vehicle can still sink if tire pressure isn't optimized. Picture this: you set up camp in a quiet, open spot, lights blasting like daylight, and then you hear the tires start to slip. Your heart rate goes up. If Thunderbone is a concept, what you should scrutinize isn't the promise of going anywhere. It's the real limits, axle load laws, braking confidence on descents, and whether you can self-recover when you're stuck. Next, we land the twist, because the craziest thing might not be the 12 wheels, but how you choose to use them. Here's the twist. The wildest part of Thunderbone might not be the 12 by 12 layout at all, but the ambition to turn a motorhome into an off-grid base that can sustain real, multi-day living. As a concept, it does its job perfectly. It triggers the imagination, fortress outside, apartment inside, and just enough exaggerated pulling power to make you want to believe. But the price you pay is this. To make a mass like this truly road trip capable and truly off-road capable, you pay in fuel, multi-axle drivetrain maintenance, and the sheer inconvenience of turning around and finding places to park. And when you're as far out as you can get, the most important thing isn't the leather couch or the big screen. It's whether the brakes give you confidence on the way down, whether the cooling system can hold, and whether you can pull yourself out. So the fair verdict is this: Thunderbone is most compelling as an extreme motorhome concept. It shows what people want, going farther without living rough. But if you want something to actually run, the question becomes whether you really need 12 by 12, or if a tighter, smarter 6 by 6 is the wiser choice. If you had to pick one, would you choose the Thunderbone 12 by 12 or a more practical 6 by 6 overland build? And why? Drop one straight answer in the comments. Subscribe for more of the wildest mobile rigs, and click the next video on screen to keep this breakdown going.